reading through the book of Isaiah in this season. It's the 11th chapter today. A shoot will come up from the stump of Jesse. From his roots, a branch will bear fruit. And the Spirit of the Lord will rest on him, the Spirit of wisdom and of understanding, the Spirit of counsel and of might, the Spirit of knowledge and fear of the Lord. And he will delight in the fear of the Lord. He will not judge by what he sees with his eyes or decide by what he hears with his ears, but with righteousness he will judge the needy. With justice he'll give decisions for the poor of the earth. He'll strike the earth with the rod of his mouth. With the breath of his lips he will slay the wicked. Righteousness will be his belt, and faithfulness the sash round his waist. The wolf will live with the lamb. The leopard will lie down with the goat. The calf and the lion and the yearling together, and a little child will lead them. The cow will feed with the bear. Their young will lie down together, and the lion will eat straw like the ox. The infant will play near the cobra's den, and the young child will put its hand into the viper's nest. For they will neither harm nor destroy on all my holy mountain. The earth will be filled with the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. In that day, the root of Jesse will stand as a banner for the peoples. The nations will rally to him, and his resting place will be glorious. The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Some 32.8 million of them were sold in the U.S. last year. That just counts the real ones, of course. Since '92, there's been a more than 30% increase in households that buy artificial Christmas trees, so much so that now only about 21% of American households have an actual live, or perhaps we should say a formerly live and officially dying Christmas tree, as opposed to the rest of us who gave up years ago on those dropping needles and bowls of water and trying to turn the tree to get the bad spot against the wall. Now, say nothing of allergic reactions to pine and fir. Now, I know all the reasons why a real tree is better. How artificial trees are bad for the environment because they're made from non-renewable petroleum, and how if they catch fire, which only happens about 0.1% of the time, they can release certain toxic fumes as well. And I understand that it just isn't Christmas for some people without that wonderful pine scent in the house. That's why they make Pine Sol. Okay? And in truth, researchers will tell you that if you use your artificial tree for at least just 4 years, it is actually more eco-friendly than a real tree. Still, I can appreciate that growing real Christmas trees is not only a noble task, especially if you're growing noble firs, I guess. It is a significant part of the whole seasonal economy. It employs 100,000 people every year. We grow Christmas trees in every state of the union, including Hawaii. Really? But whether you go real or faux, Christmas trees, in one fashion or another, are part of the celebration of Christmas for almost all of us. Even in foreign countries where Christianity is not even observed by most folks, you'll still find Christmas trees, along with other Christmas decorations in the homes of many. But had you asked the Old Testament prophet Isaiah about what kind of tree he would have suggested in order to best commemorate the coming of the Messiah, he would not have mentioned either a pine or a fir or even a cedar from Lebanon. Instead, he would have said simply a stump, maybe just a little stem, a twig. Think Charlie Brown and you've got it. Because Isaiah understood that sometimes it's not the mighty forest which matters in the end. All forests can be cut down. If you don't believe that, you haven't lived here very long and watched all the master plan communities come in. What Isaiah realized is important is what God can do with something, no matter how great or small it may be. You see, we said last week, Isaiah lived in a time of enormous frustration and weariness, sandwiched in between two mighty empires. By 700 BC, the Jews had been fighting almost nonstop for 40 years, first with the Assyrians, then with the Egyptians, then back with the Assyrians, then back with the folks in Egypt. For 2 generations, every Jewish kid had grown up with a sword in a hand and a spear in the other. And with the Assyrians barreling down once more upon their region, Isaiah saw that his homeland had become a nation of withered branches and dead stumps, he said. You couldn't even rightly call it the house of David anymore. It had so declined that now it was just the rootstock, the Yetzah, the stump, chopped down to the very ground of Jesse, David's father, with only its unseen roots still even viable, however weak. And all that made Isaiah even more weary, I suspect, for he longed for a peace which was not there. He craved peace, in fact, just because he had known discord and war for so very long. See, like you and me, Isaiah had read the book of Genesis. He knew that God had not created us to kill and argue and hurt each other. He knew that we were all made in the image of God. Therefore, we were created to be peaceful with each other. That it was not in God's intention for us to so regularly injure each other. He longed for that kind of tranquility represented by even a cessation of hostilities within the animal kingdom, where lions and lambs could lie down together. I have a feeling that we could all understand that. Who among us wouldn't like more peace in our lives this morning? Nelson Mandela certainly wanted that. Some called him a terrorist, but he was actually a devoted Christian. Baptized in a small Methodist stone church in his Eastern Cape village, educated in Methodist boarding schools in his native South Africa, causing him to often praise the missionary efforts of the church, especially as it engaged the society around it. In his own words, Mandela understood that great anger and violence can never build a nation. So instead, he took it as his task to heal wounds, bridge the chasms that had divided his homeland until, in the words of Isaiah, the wolf might lie down with the lamb, and the leopard lie down with the goat, and the Afrikaner with the Zulu. Mandela knew all about putting your hand in the viper's nest. He put his own life in such a nest for decades, spending 27 years in prison. When he came out, he also knew enough to understand what it means to neither harm nor destroy on the holy mountain of God. Or we may think of what a Lutheran pastor named Edward Marquardt once wished for. In the opening of his message from these verses in Isaiah, Ed Marquardt asked simply, wouldn't it be nice if there were peace on earth? If you can't have peace between nations, wouldn't it be nice to have peace within our families? Wouldn't that be nice? Wouldn't it be nice to have a whole week together as husband and wife and not have a fight? Wouldn't that be nice? Wouldn't it be nice if your children did not fight with each other? Wouldn't it be nice to go on a family vacation and not have any blow-ups? Wouldn't that be nice? If that isn't possible, wouldn't it be nice to have peace within myself? Wouldn't it be nice if I weren't so harsh with myself? Wouldn't it be nice if I didn't explode at myself in anger? Wouldn't it be nice if my guts were calm? Wouldn't it be nice if I could sit around all night and not have a compulsion to eat ice cream or drink wine or a beer in order to calm my nerves? If I can't have peace between nations or peace within the family, maybe at least I could have some peace within me. If I couldn't have that, wouldn't it be nice to have peace at least a few days before or after Christmas in preparation for the Prince of Peace? Wouldn't it be nice to have a little bit of Christmas peace in your house and in my house? And it would be, wouldn't it? To discover, as Amy Grant sings about her grown-up Christmas list, no more lives torn apart, then wars would never start, and time would heal our hearts, and everyone would have a friend, and right would always win, and love would never end. Only to find that kind of peace, that kind of hope, we have to first focus in on the only one who promised that he could bring that sort of ceasefire into our lives. That's what gave the prophet pause so long ago on that day. Even as he gazed across the barren landscape of his country's future, he saw a single sign of life among those withered branches and stripped out forests. For he saw a netzer, a shoot that came up from the root of Jesse that promised to change absolutely everything. 7 centuries before he was even born, Isaiah saw Jesus. Now, I know some commentators will tell you, well, these verses are really about Hezekiah. He ruled the southern kingdom of Judah towards the end of Isaiah's long career as a prophet, which lasted 64 years. Others will say Isaiah talking about Zerubbabel, the first one who was to lead the wave of refugees back from the Babylonian exile. But even the Targum, the Aramaic translation of the Hebrew Bible, says that this passage was meant to apply to none other than the Messiah, and I believe it was as well. Jesus clearly was the king who was perfectly prepared by God to rule over his people, just as these verses tell us. Jesus had that 7-fold spirit of wisdom and understanding and counsel and power and knowledge and fear of the Lord. The Spirit of the Lord rested upon him, as we're told in Revelation 5, the Lamb of God possessed the 7-fold Spirit of God. His wisdom and his knowledge were reflected in the stories which he told, in the encounters which others had with him, in his answers to all the trick questions which were posed to him, in his perfect reading of people's hearts. And he was a king with unerring insight and the ability to balance out justice and mercy and law and grace and even time and eternity. In other words, the coming Messiah was one who was fully equipped and prepared for governing. But more than just that, we can say in the words of one early church leader that Isaiah knew more perfectly than all others the mystery of the religion of the gospel. For Isaiah saw as well Jesus would be a king who could even bring life in death. And how? Because God never forgets his promises, my friends. Never. Way back in 2 Samuel 7, God had promised that David's kingdom would last forever, and in fact the dynasty which he began did rule for some 500 years until Jerusalem fell in 586 BC. After that time, Israel had no more kings until some centuries later, when the cavalier command of a distant dictator in Rome forced Joseph and Mary, both descendants of David, to return to Bethlehem, the home of Jesse and David, both for this ridiculous empire-wide census, which was really just all about taxes. And there, so the Gospels tell us, Jesus was born. And that shoot that rose up from the stump of Jesse was to become the father of a greater nation than even Abraham. See, if he could defeat the grave itself, the Lord of lost causes could certainly manifest life out of a dead stump. And how? Because life is in the roots. And that life in God's own time will always manifest itself. If there's a dead stump in your life this morning, and I suspect there is in most of our lives somewhere, you ask King Jesus to go grow there, and so he will. He is the King who can make everything right, even when we don't see any human way possible. When I read this passage, I think sometimes of Buchenwald, the infamous concentration camp for the political prisoners of Nazi Germany. In the 8 years in which it operated, that camp held more than 238,000 prisoners, 56,549 of whom died in its walls. But in April 1945, American troops liberated that camp. They transferred its inmates to a temporary displaced persons facility, and in one of those facilities, a small group of Buchenwald survivors began to dream of settling in Palestine and establishing a kibbutz, a collective farm there. Soon after the nation of Israel was founded thus, 121 of those survivors began their kibbutz in the Shephelah, in the central part of that nation. Know what they named it? Netzer Buchenwald. Later on, it was renamed Netzer Cervini after a Jewish Italian fighter who parachuted into Italy during World War II, captured by the Germans, executed in the Dachau concentration camp. Whether they called it Buchenwald or by any other name, Cervini, that farm began to flourish. It still flourishes today, but it's kept its same name in the Hebrew, Netzer, because the founders of that kibbutz understood what Isaiah meant so long before. A shoot will come up from the stump of Jesse, and from its roots a netzer, a branch, will bear fruit. See, great and lofty indeed was the forest of Assyria, but it was cut down by the mighty one. By the year 701 BC, the defeat of the Assyrian army was complete. But just as Isaiah had seen, in the rootstock of Jesse, there was yet life. Because from it, with its roots still in the ground, would come a twig and then a branch, and then the branch itself would one day bear fruit, not of a material nature, but of a spiritual one that had to do with obedience to the Lord of creation. And Isaiah foretold that the root of Jesse was not just coming once into this world, but that he would return one day to judge with righteousness the needy and give decisions for the poor, to strike the earth with the rod of his mouth, to slay the wicked with the breath of his lips. And righteousness will be his belt. In ancient times, that meant a warrior was ready to face a contest or a struggle. And when Christ returns, that is when true peace will find this world at last. That is when the lion and the lamb really will lie down together, as all enmity disappears, not just between people, but even among the beast. So complete will be this reversal of nature, in fact, that even the most ancient of hatreds, that between a serpent and man, will be wiped out, as the infant will play near the hole of the cobra, and the young child is going to put his hand into the viper's nest unharmed. Because on that day, the root of Jesse will stand as a banner for all peoples. Just as Jesus himself once said that if he be lifted up, he would draw all men unto himself. Until then, we may still be living with the lions. May we never forget that we're living with the promises and presences of God with us as well, Emmanuel. More than half a century ago, C.S. Lewis explained the Christian's sense of homesickness in his magnificent essay entitled The Weight of Glory. If I read nothing else the rest of my life, I'll just keep rereading that one essay, The Weight of Glory. Lewis said that our lifelong nostalgia, our longing to be reunited with something in the universe from which we now feel cut off, to be on the inside of some door which we have always seen from the outside, is no mere neurotic fancy. but the truest index of our real situation. And to be at last summoned inside would be both glory and honor beyond all our merits, and also the healing of that old ache. Do you know what he's talking about? Have you ever felt that old ache and not even known what it was? We've sung it, and the choir has sung it today. Isaiah 'twas foretold it. Lo, how a rose ere blooming from tender stem hath sprung, of Jesse's lineage coming, as men of old have sung. From almost nothing has come the Netzer. Maybe there's an almost nothing in your life this morning. Do you know that life is in the roots? You let Jesus come transform that. I love what we heard from Romans that was read during the lighting of our candles. The root of Jesse will spring up, one who will arise to rule over the nations. In him, the Gentiles, that's us, in him the Gentiles will hope. Hope and peace. That's what God's promised. And there's nothing artificial about it at all. Amen. We're going to close singing Jesus, Oh, What a Wonderful Child.